All right, guys, let's go ahead and get started. First off, my name is Corey Stanley. I'm the Navionics Technical Specialist for Texas, Louisiana, and Oklahoma. I appreciate everyone logging in and attending the webinar tonight. We're going to go over some stuff about deep cranking, kind of some of my personal preferences. We're going to go through, I'll probably use something like Toledo Bend as an example. We'll go through different areas where you kind of want to start looking for some of those congregated schools of fish. And then we'll move into, boat position, tackle, my bait of choice, which is a 6-inch Cloud 9 crankbait. And then we'll move into the line, rod and reel selection. And then what I'll do is I'll keep everyone muted. At the very end, I'll start fielding questions. And what I'll get you to do is just go ahead and go to the chat session, kind of like you did on the audio, and ask away. And I'll go one by one answering everyone's questions until we're done. Once again, guys, thanks for attending. I like to start all my webinars off with a sonar chart example. And for those of you who don't know, sonar chart is a program with Navionics where it allows users to record and upload data to the database, do the mapping for your areas. If you may not be seeing the mapping you like. For today's example, I'm going to use the Sabine River system, partly because I actually live in Orange. Too, because Hackney just had a big win there on the Bass Elite Series, so I'll kind of look at some of the areas he was fishing, show you some good examples of sonar chart and why it's important and how it can benefit you. All right, so here's the Sabine River, and so you can look. This is the Navionics web app. You can come down here to the bottom left-hand corner, click on it, and you can toggle between the Navionics map and the sonar chart map. So as you can see on the Navionics app, or just the Navionics database, this is the data that was available pre the Sonar Chart program and Sonar Chart Layer, which the Sonar Chart Layer is available on all Platinum cards and the Nav Plus Regions card. The first time you plug it in your unit, you do have to go to Chart Select, and Humminbird, you basically go to menu twice, Chart Select, and select the Fish and Chip layer. The Gen 3 Lowrances, it's going to be called Sonar. You go to Sonar Chart, you go to Chart View, and then still make sure you click the Sonar Chart box. That's only something you have to do one time. From then on out, as long as the card hasn't been removed, it automatically comes on. Back to what we were talking about. This is before the Sonar Chart layer. Right in here is the boat ramp where the Elites launched. As you can see, it's just basically an outline of the water. You turn on the sonar chart layer and you can see where the main channel, the river runs, the deeper edges, the holes. We actually did a sonar chart contest here. The first year the Elites did, I hosted a sonar chart event. We gave away some stuff to do some, to gather some data. And you can see, so you come in here, turn it off, none of that stuff's there. Prime example. So one of the places that Swindle actually fished was what they call Square Lake. Before the sonar chart layer, this lake didn't even exist on a map. The only way you could see it was in Google Earth. I went in and mapped it in about 25 minutes, just making circles in it while we fished. And as you can see, there's actually pretty decent contours that are in that lake. You can see where the deeper banks are. It's actually a pretty deep lake. They actually dug the lake to build this interstate. This is a little bit of background information. Going up to kind of look where Hackney won at. As you go up the main river, you come through I-10, and Hackney basically was fishing this canal, and his main canal was this long straight canal that's right here. As you can see, you gain a lot more depth. This canal here has very little contours in it. It hadn't been mapped, whereas the main river itself had. And the canal, you can see there's deep holes, and that was kind of the big deal. You can see a lot of where these drains come into this canal, it's made like washouts in it. And anyone who watched the Bass Elite Live, you kind of saw where he was talking about, he was catching them in the middle of that drain. Well, and this is kind of why, because where these two canals would empty into it, it makes holes in the middle of that drain. And anywhere he could find wood laying down, and it's every one of these little washouts is kind of where he was catching some of his quality fish at. let's see. Another, which is the example we'll use today as far as looking at some of the areas on, cranking. This is Toledo Bend. As you can see before the sonar chart, and the number one question we were asked when we were at the Classic was, why is there huge areas where there's no data? Which, as you can see, this is Sandy Creek Flats on Toledo Bend, on kind of the mid-lake area, mid to south lake area. There's just a hole there. It's a perfect cut line. And the reason it's a perfect cut line is because when Navionics split with hot maps or hotspots, they took their data. And this is why it's exact cut lines. That was the section of map they were providing. But now with the sonar chart program, all that area is actually mapped as long as you have it turned on. That's why it's important, guys, to make sure you know what's available on your card and make sure you have it turned on. All right, let's move on to the subject of the webinar, is deep cranking. I'll go through a few different examples of, like, if I was dissecting this lake as a new lake, some of the areas I would look, say if it's middle of summer, you're looking at, the fish are staging deep, so that's, I treat it no differently than any other than, say, the pre-spawn. Where the main spawning areas are, on a lake. You can kind of look at it and tell those long flat pockets. And this creek here, for example, those fish are going to spawn in the backs of those things. Well, they use those drains as a navigation route. So as you come out of those drains, the things I like to key on, depending on water temperature and time of year, and especially if it's a new lake, which you're going to kind of want to start maybe a little shallower. You're not, you may not want to start out in 25 foot of water throwing a Cloud 9 C25. You may want to start in a little closer, throwing, a little bit, that 12 to 15 foot range, and then work your way out to find out where, one, the bait's at, and then wherever the bait is that time of year, there's going to be fish. 9 times out of 10. That's kind of what I look at. Me personally, when I'm breaking down a new body of water, I like to start in. So kind of say, where this pocket flattens out in the back. It's a good spawning pocket. Where you start seeing a little bit sharper contours, which is where the contours are stacked a little closer together, is kind of letting you know that's where a more defined drop-off is. So I would start, and me personally, I like to scan everything. I rely on my electronics very heavily this time of year. Not saying you can't just pull up on a ledge and fish it, because, that is, but to be a little more efficient, some of those fish that are just laying on the bottom are harder to see. You're not going to catch, may not see them, but you can catch a few fish there. But when I'm cranking deep, I'm looking for schools of fish. I'm not looking for one or two, random fish. I'm looking for those schools of, 10, 15, 20 fish, that are feeding. So I rely heavily on my electronics. And what I would do here is I would start in the middle of this drain and start eyeling my way out. I like stuff like that to where it's a real steep drop in the middle, because you can scan that kind of stuff really quickly with side imaging, that's why it's important to learn your electronics, learn what things look like. I start scanning it, and as soon as I start seeing bait, I may slow down, go back over something. But what I like is everyone can see on a map now with all the new technology of the mapping. Everyone can see where those sharp drops are. I like the little irregularities, stuff that don't stand out a whole lot. It can be something very small on a drop that's different than everything else that can hold a just ton of fish. And perfect example on this flat here, it's pretty common on both sides. As you make your way out, you have a little imperfection in the side of this little drain right here. That's an area I would like to look, or the back side of this little bend. As you work your way out, you can see there's a hump out here, towards the middle. That comes off to really, really deep water. You basically go from 10, 12 foot of water, you're a cast away, you're in 33, 35 foot of water. That little bend on the inside of that's key stuff that, some of that stuff gets overlooked. Everyone wants to go down these main ledges and just, cover water, because not every lake sets up like a Kentucky lake where you can go down these long ledges fishing. Places like Toledo Bend, there is long ledges you can fish, but it's not a Tennessee River impoundment, so you're not going to have a ton of current all the time over these things. So those fish like to sit on those little irregularities, like perfect example, like we were talking here, the side of this hump. So you got a little draw that comes up on the inside of that hump. That's one of those things I pull up there, I scan that. If I see bait, the way I like to approach that is to try it at 3 different angles. If you see fish that are there, don't just pull up, have one angle, crank through it, and then turn around and leave. Because if those fish are there, so what I would suggest doing, pull up, throw across that little point, turn around, get your boat up on the point, throw deep, pull shallow. Present your bait in several different directions of those fish. And something I like to have, if I'm really keen on that 18 to 22 foot of water, I like to use the Cloud Series C9 from 6 Cents, the C25, because I like a bait that's going to get down there. I know it's hitting the bottom because those fish are going to react when it hits the bottom and glances off, or you're cranking it, you're just pounding it into the ground and you let off for a second, it floats off of it. Those fish like those little, it makes it look injured when it deflects off of stuff. So I like to stay in constant contact with the bottom, unless I'm seeing, hey, I'm in 22 foot of water and those fish are in 15, they're suspended, then obviously you're going to want to adjust for that. But everyday typical cranking, I like to have a bait that's making contact, it's very erratic as it's coming across the bottom. And then on those regularities, every once in a while, you'll find brush, and that kind of stuff is just key, because that brush is holding bait, which is in turn holding crappie and spotted bass that the bigger largemouth feed on. This time of year, obviously their metabolism slow down. They get real lethargic, so they would rather have one big meal versus in the spring or pre-spawn where they just feed all day. They may only feed 2 or 3 times a day, but if they try to take advantage of that, of that feeding period, and get one big meal, it's less effort for them. Looking at a few different areas. Again, I really still like to look at where those spawning flats are, and then work my way out of them. Then once you locate, and one good thing to be more efficient, once you locate how those fish are hanging on inside draws of a point in 20 to 22 foot of water, well, then you can kind of start narrowing down your search. You're not spending hours on hours of just idling random stuff. Then you can kind of start looking and putting a pattern together. No different than, this is main leg flats. It's no different. You have a big spawning pocket here. Those fish are going to migrate right out of that and then hang on some of this, this outside. Here you have deep water way up in it on a hump, and you've got a couple of real tight points. That's the sort of stuff I like to look at. And it may not be out here in the 20, 25 foot of water. You may have to work your way up the point to see where they're at. And depending on weather conditions, sometimes those fish can be on top of the point, the sides of the point. Again, that kind of gets back to why I like to scan those areas instead of just pulling up and fishing them. Another area is if they're not on those big points, I like to look at banks that have sharp drops that are really close to deep water. Here you have a little spawning pocket. They're a cast away, and those fish can be out here in 30, 32 foot of water. But when they get ready to feed, it's zero effort for them to be back up shallow chasing, or if they're eating brim or whatever they may be doing. Kind of go just jump sides, a whole different end of the side of the lake. This is what's considered Pirates Cove. This is actually where KVD won 3 years ago, when KVD won on the Bassmaster Elite Series on Toledo Bend. And as you can see, it's no different, the stuff he was cranking. He was in all these islands right here. And something else that's big to make sure, this actually is a good area for the sonar chart deal like we talked about earlier. If I come over here and turn off the sonar chart, you don't see all those little defined creeks and drains and ditches. But I come over here and turn it on, and you can see where all the tight drops are and, those drains. Here's another great example is where a ditch comes off the main creek, the creek of that, that area, and pushes up through this flat. As you can see, the left side of it is more of a slow tapering drop. The right side drops straight off. So that's one of those areas you can probe with a deep diving crankbait. And those fish should be, you're going to, again, I like to scan them to look for those areas that they're holding more bait, or, there's a big wad of, fish or brush. A lot of guys like to come into a brush pile. Your first thought is, let me pick up a big worm, a football jig, something along those lines. Me, I like to back out to it, kind of figure out the depth that brush pile's in, crank down to it, really paying attention to it. And as soon as your bait makes contact, letting it float up. And that's one thing I do like about the Cloud9 C20 and C25 from 6th Sense. When you hit that pile, they're super buoyant. And when they float up, I mean, they float up instantly. So, you actually can avoid hanging up as often as some of your other crankbaits that kind of just, hover there before they start slowly rising up. That way, you can be cranking it heavy, hit it, stop it, let it ease up, and then hit it again, and then those little erratic motions, around that pile will pull those fish out of that pile. When I'm cranking, kind of jumping ahead of myself, but if I'm cranking piles, I'm going to use a little heavier line, in a bigger crankbait. Say if that pile's an 18-foot of water, I could get by with a C20. Well, I'm actually going to go to a C25 and maybe up my line size from 12 to 16 or 20 or 18-pound test sunline to have a little bit more abrasion resistance to cranking inside, around a lot of heavy piles. And that's kind of where I get into when I am going out strictly cranking, having 3 to 4 or 5 rods rigged up, different crankbaits, different line sizes. I'll have 2 C25s, rigged up, one with 16 or one with 18 to 20 and another one with, 12 to 16, depending on what I'm doing. That way, when I come to a pile, I can reach down, pick up another rod. And, as expensive as crankbaits are, you want to kind of pay attention to that sort of thing. As you can see, you can spend all day in areas like this. And that's kind of what I like to do if I'm learning a new lake. I'll pick a big area, especially if those fish are out deep. I'll pick a big area and try to learn that entire area to kind of, you can take advantage of your time instead of running all over the lake. You can figure out the fish in one area. And once you can figure out what they're doing in one area, a lot of times you can duplicate that pattern. You look at an area like this huge arm right here. Obviously, there's tons of resident fish, but you also have, a lot of different types of water in there. You got a lot of, shallow flats, hydrilla, deep drains, so you kind of have tons of different options there. And you could spend all day in this area, but you can find the depth those fish are in before you start, going all across the lake. Because in an area like this, you may be able to bounce to, 4, 5, 6 different little humps, or points or, wherever the fish are holding, and really, maximize your fishing time because you can hit 30 spots all within, a mile of each other versus having to run 30 miles down the lake. That doesn't always happen, but if I'm dissecting a new body of water, that's what I look for first before starting to, just run everywhere. Because on areas like this, you can actually, follow the fish from where they spawn to where they stop post-spawn. They're going to move back up. Some of them when the brim, and perch start spawning, and then, when it comes June, July, August, they're going to start either one of two things, either hanging on the deep structure, or they're going to bury in grass. So you also have another option of finding, this area over here on Toledo Bend is very clear. So, there's been times I've seen matted hydrilla in 18 feet of water. Well, you can also back off the sides of that, pick up a C20, go down the sides of it and crank those edges. Now, granted, it's a lot of trial and error, making long casts, getting hung up in grass, pulling it out, but once you can figure out where that edge is, it's another thing that's a little different that, it gets overlooked is cranking those edges. This little pocket here is another great example. You can see what kind of a crazy drop it makes here. You go from 16, to 40 foot of water in a maybe 30-yard stretch. So all these little points, guarantee you there's tons of brush here. But just looking at this one little area, you can see how, you can really pick something apart to figure out where the fish are. This outside main lake points you've got here, you got a hump at 14 foot of water, and then you have a, 30 foot of water comes way in close to it. Those fish are going to be somewhere on the sides of this point, whether it be on the top of it, the sides. I guarantee you there's brush on the sides of it somewhere, just no one's Toledo Bend. You can figure out where those fish are at. And they're not always going to be main lake. You have resident fish that, obviously they're going to spawn back here. Well, areas like this that have a ton of, spawning areas, and then you move out and you've got 35, 40 foot of water, those fish never have to leave, those main huge pockets. Now, I don't typically like to get in the backs of them, this time of year, just because of the fact if you haven't been getting much rain, that water turns a little stagnant, it'll move those fish out. So I like to kind of stay mid pocket towards the main leg. It's kind of just my approach to that stuff. All right, let's move on to the actual, the crankbaits I like to throw. If you go actually to the 6 Sense website, they have a ton of different options. So just go into the homepage, hard baits, and you can see, and this website is awesome. All right, this website's awesome as far as figuring out. They really break it down as far as what their baits do. So you can just look at our hard baits, and it shows you all the crankbaits they have available and the depth range that they cover. Me and my personal preference is it hasn't been out all that long, but for deep cranking, I like this Cloud 9 series. This deep crankbaits 10 to 25 kind of covers everything. Go into it. And you can see this. You have this Cloud 9 C25. That's probably my number one go-to, and it actually is available in a rattling or a silent. As you come in here, even when you go to this page, it gives you another breakdown. The C10 is good for 8 to 12 foot. The C15 is 13 to 17. The C20 is 18 to 22. C25, 23, 27 gives the weight of them. Those depths are pretty accurate. Say using my number one go-to line size when I'm cranking is 12-pound test fluorocarbon. Really, you can cast to those baits a mile. You can see how much they weigh. Even the C15 weighs an ounce. So that's where it comes into using, which we'll get into in a minute, a really big reel, a lot of line capacity. The C20 and C25 are probably my number one. That's the two I've always got tied on. You come in, I actually like to keep it super simple with color, which is pretty nice. You can see what the best sellers are. I try to keep it to about 3 or 4 colors, depending on time of year that I'm cranking. Obviously, I know we talked a lot about the summertime approach, and really, I like to deep crank as well in the pre-spawn. When it's say January, the fish are out deep before they started moving in, staging the spawn. It's really no different. They're going to be in the same. You can kind of follow them in the same areas in the pre-spawn, just like how they move in the post-spawn. They use those same routes, those same drains. It's kind of like a whitetail deer, how they like to, follow edges of stuff. Fish are no different. So I stick pretty simple to colors. I stick with the blue chartreuse shad. In the wintertime, I really like to crank that platinum citrus, the Cloud 9 C25 platinum citrus. For some reason, Rayburn, Toledo Bend, Table Rock, that time of year, they love that color. Of course, the shad color, I like the threadfin shad or the wild shad, either one of those. If the water's a little bit dirty, I'll go to some kind of a chartreuse shad, whether it be most of the time like the shad scents, just a little bit. Or if the water's really stained, I'll go like 2 years ago with the Bassmaster Open on Ross Barnett. The water was super dirty. I was throwing a chartreuse shad. The sexified chartreuse shad has a lot more chartreuse in it. So I kind of keep it simple, 3, 4, 5 colors, depending on weather conditions, depending on, water clarity. Now in February, there are times I like to throw, that custom bluegill color because there is some perch still gathered out deep. They're not real shallow if you've had a pretty cold winter. You kind of can't go wrong with the Cloud 9 series, whether it be the C10, C15, C20, C25. Now, there are a ton of other things offered, from 6 Sense. They have some awesome shallow, square bill crankbaits, medium crankbaits. And even the original, the Crush 500 ED is a really good bait. And if you notice the paint jobs on these baits, super durable. You catch 100 fish, the bait still looks great. Beating and banging on rocks and stuff. It's super durable. As you can see, some of the Crush series are actually, since the Cloud 9's kind of taking them over, they got some really good pricing on some of that. But you will not find a better painted, crankbait. A lot of attention to detail. And not only, they're cranking. I know we're talking cranking today, but, they're swim baits, jigs. They've got probably one of the best swim jigs on the market. Catch a ton of fish. It does not tear the paint up. The skirt stays on, which makes it nice. And something else I like to do too, like when we're cranking, I'm catching a ton of fish, I do like to pick up the C25 silent. And reason being, it's kind of those fish get accustomed. Like I say, if you've been on a really good school of fish, those fish get accustomed to, that bait coming through making the same noise. You've caught 15 fish out of that school. They shut down. It's nice to go back up with something silent. It kind of sneaks up on them, gets their attention, kind of startles them, and they just, out of reaction, bite it. I really have been able to pick up, another 3, 4, 5 fish out of a school, due to that, going to a different presentation with a crankbait. And again, you can see that, I kind of keep harping on that. I like to pick a crankbait that it goes, if I'm fishing 13 to 17 foot, or I'm sorry, 15 to 17 foot, I'm going to go to the C20. Just for the fact that I like to know that when I make a long cast, that bait's getting to the bottom super quick, and then I can slow my retrieve down and really comb through some of those areas. No different if I'm fishing that 20 to 24 foot, I'm going to go to a C25 for the fact, a long cast, get the bait down, a little bit deeper. All right, moving on to the equipment that I like to use. First, we'll look at the rods. I'm a big Lose guy. I use a lot of their products. Looking at the rods, I use this Lose Customs Plus Speed Stick series. They've got some specialized cranking rods. There we go. These Super Duty 1, 2, 3, and 4 rods, as you can see, they cover kind of everything. For the C20 and C25, the C20, I use the LSD1 Super Duty 1. It's a 7-11 rod. It really lets you launch that bait. Has a good backbone, good tip. I mean, I've boat swung 5-pounders with the rod. So it's got a really good backbone, just to last 4 or 5 hours is where you really have your play in it. Which a good crankbait rod is very important when you're throwing, those big crankbaits with those big treble hooks on them. Once I move on to the C25, I like to step up to the Super Duty 2. You go to a little bit heavier action rod. Again, it's 7-11. So I really like keeping with the same style of rod no matter what crankbait I'm throwing, just change the actions. That way, every time you pick up a different bait, especially on a crankbait where you're rearing back, throwing that bait as hard as you can. I like to have the same setup in my hand at all times. That way, every time I pick up, I'm not having to learn the reel. I'm not having to learn, even if they're similar, they're still going to cast a little bit different, and I like those 2 rods. You can really load the rod up and make a really long cast. Moving on to the reels. Kind of go over the reels that I use. So you have 2 different options there. I like this is a new reel that's out, hadn't been out that long. They've come back out with a BB1. It actually had discontinued a little while back. Now they've come back with it. But this Super Duty wide spool is the one I've been using the past couple of years. The thing about it is I like so much. The reel is still somewhat compact compared to a Shimano. It actually holds the same amount on the line as the Shimano 300, the Crata 300, which is a huge reel. Whereas this reel has a smaller frame, but still holds 190 yards, a 14-pound test. And while you may think and go, all right, well, I'm not going to use that much line. Well, the thing about it is with that, you want to keep that spool as full as you can. That way it allows you to make those long casts. And, if you have to retie a few times, with a crankbait, that's something you got to really pay attention to because you're grinding the bottom. Retie pretty often. After every couple of fish, I'm going to retie. I'm constantly checking my line. That reel allows you, if you a good day of cranking, you may take 20 yards off of, a spool. Well, if you do that off a full spool with 190, you still have 170 yards of line with a full spool that allows you to just bomb that reel. I go with a 5-to-1 gear ratio for either one. Like I said, and I like to keep my setups as similar as possible. I'll use the 5-to-1 SD W2S on, the C25, the C20. I don't normally go to I'll go to a little bit different setup, like with a square bill, but as far as deep cranking, I stick to those reels that seem like, good performance, really good drag system. But that light line, that's super important too. The drag's as smooth as it can be. When those fish get close and start making those boat runs, when you're trying to tire them out, if you have a drag that likes to stick, you'll break that light line in a hurry. Moving on to, the line I like to use. The line I like to use is the Sunline Shooter for cranking. It's expensive line, but it's very, very smooth, very strong, and very abrasion resistant. Now, all I use is Sunline, but if I'm using normal fishing, I use the Sniper just because it's a little more affordable. But for cranking, I try not to cut it, spare any expense on that. I use the Sunline Shooter, and either depending on the lightest, I normally go is 12-pound test deep cranking with the C20. Now the C25, I normally try to either do 14 or 16. If I'm doing brush, I'll go up to an 18 or 20. And what I like about the shooter is if you really look into it, it's the diameter size of 20 is equal to that of 16 on most other fluorocarbons. So that makes a huge difference. You can get away with a lot heavier line with a smaller diameter. And all the stuff we looked at today, another website I know everyone knows about, Tackle Warehouse. Tackle Addict is a store that is local to us. There's one in Lake Livingston. There's one on Sam Rayburn. But I have ordered Fishing the Bassmaster Opens. I have ordered a ton of things from these guys. Make a phone call. They, next day stuff to you straight to your door. And it's one less thing. I don't have to go run around to a tackle shop. You can just call these guys, or you can place it online, whatever is best for you. It's super fast turnaround. These guys are awesome at Tackle Addict. If you're in the store, their selection of 6 cents crankbaits is very impressive. Then they have a whole wall of nothing but 6 cents products. The Sunline line, they have bulk spools there, the 1,200 yard 660, or the shooter and the smaller spool sizes. This is kind of a one-stop shop where they're, no matter what you're looking for. And something else that I really didn't go over is the fact that I pay a lot of attention to my hooks when you're cranking, because when you're using, you're in deep water, you're using a lighter line, in a rod that has some, it's kind of parabolic. It doesn't have a ton of just like flip and stick backbone. Having a super sharp hook that when you lean into it, makes all the difference in the world. I like to use let's see if I can find one here. I use the Mustad, obviously not the barbless. Let's see. Here we go. I use the Mustad KVD Elite triple grip hooks. Super sharp. They're super strong. You never break them. You don't bend them. And they're available in a ton of sizes. Obviously on that, I like to go to either a number 1 or a 1/0 with the C25s, and then go down to a 2 with the with a C20. So something you really need to pay a lot of attention to. Even if you're not catching fish, you're cranking rock, you're cranking hard clay, that'll dull those hooks as well. After a full day, I'd change them out, before you start into a tournament or something. It gives you a few options there. All right, guys, that kind of wraps up the bulk of what I was going to go over. We'll take this time, if you would, go to the chat. Anyone has any questions, we'll start going through answering those, and I'll help you out the best way I can. All right, Alan, I asked, fishing deep crank KVD 11.4, have trouble with 2 things: getting the advertised depth of the crankbait and true straight retrieve without veering sideways. Any tips? Using a 150 Tally high-speed reel with bigger spool. One, Alan, I would actually recommend going, I assume an HS means high speed, making sure using a 5-to-1 gear ratio, because if you crank those baits too fast, you will get rolled and that bait won't get down as deep. That bait's not going to get as deep. as that advertised depth. Because if you're, because you may feel like you're going slow, but you may be cranking that bait a little too fast for it to get down there. Well, that's why I like a 5-to-1 reel. It's kind of a good all around, you have good control over the bait, but yet it's not overpowering the bait to where it's not getting its full action. I just said about getting as you say, you getting into, it's not getting the advertised depth. That's another thing I kind of, was talking about, how if I'm cranking, say, 20 feet, even though the C20 advertises to go to 20, getting to 20 sometimes means perfect line condition and the fact that you're making a super long cast to get it down there. If you're not making a cast that's going 70 yards, you're never going to get that bait to there, because that's ideal conditions. I go up to the next size. So if I'm cranking 20 foot of water, just because even if sometimes, most of the time I am making a long cast, having that bigger bait will get that bait to the bottom faster than me having to crank it till it's halfway back to the boat. It hits the bottom, or then it don't go 10 feet and it starts coming right back up. So that's one reason I like to go to a little bit, a bait that, calls for it goes 27, I'm cranking 20. Well, I know that bait's going to get to the bottom a lot quicker, and it's on the bottom for a lot longer time. Cameron asked, for the 4-6-to-1 too slow? It's not too slow, but it's kind of like a mountain bike theory. I think it'll be fine most times, but, there's a time you're working yourself to death too, because you're spinning it so fast. But throwing a big deep diving crankbait, it's going to be a lot less, tension on the rod too. Shaw asked, I use spinning reels. What spinning reel would you use for deep cranking? That is a really good question. I've never deep cranked with a spinning rod, just because it's hard to get that, even though it's cranking and you're not considered, it's still power fishing, and it's tough to get it, get that bait down there. But let's take a look. Lew's does have some, some really good spinning equipment. They've got a long range. Let's see. Let's go to the rods. I would go with the longest, biggest rod you can get by with on the spinning. Let's see what they've got here. They've got a 7.2. All right, here we go. Open water spinning. These all-purpose 7'6". But you can see, you don't really have a, it's not rated for that. But if that's what you're limited to using, go with as long a rod as you can possibly get, like these new open water spinnings that are 7'6". You can hold up to 17-pound test line, would be a good option. Ethan asked if I direct or to the bait or use snaps. No, I tie direct. I tie direct on, everything that I use. And one, because snaps work. I'm a little old school. I try to get by with, as few failure points as possible. And now they all come with these big oval split rings. So, that gives that bait a ton of action. So we're used to it. Came with a little small, circle one. So the split ring gave it more action. Well, now it's not really an issue. Cameron asked, besides hitting brush, you stop and go. That's something I actually didn't cover. That's a good question, Cameron. I like to vary my retrieve. Until you get that first bite, I vary my retrieve as much as possible, for the fact that, you need to figure out if you're cranking it, real heavy, and you stop it and catch a fish. Well, that's a big, to let you know they're hitting it when it stops. So you need to start doing stop and go. There's times you stop it and then you burn it right afterwards, and they eat it when it's burning it. So paying attention to your retrieve on those first couple of fish will allow you to start going, all right, this is the retrieve I need to use. And that where it comes down to really paying attention to what's going on, not just, cranking, whining. It's easy to get into a rut, not paying attention to those kind of things. But if you can remember to pay attention to them, it makes you a lot more efficient on the water. Scott and Ethan both asked what knot. I use a double cinch knot, where it's basically you double the line, hold them with so you'd hold it, with your finger to where you have a loop, and you basically have 4 pieces of line, spin the bait, take the loop, go through the bottom hole, top hole, pull it. So when you actually cut it, you have 3 tag ends. Because what that does is any of those, really any knot that has a loop that goes through it, or a double tag like that, what it does is basically it makes a cushion between the bait and your knot, and you're cinching down on top of that cushion versus on top of your knot. So, and what that does, like, I quit using a polymer knot, because the polymer knot is a great knot. I use it for everything else, but when using, say, small diameter, thick, heavy, thick, dense fluorocarbon, that knot wants to, when it cuts itself because it's pulling against itself so bad. Whereas a double cinch knot, you have two lines that are against between your split ring and your knot that acts as a cushion. So it cinches down on that line and kind of gives you almost like a shock absorber that helps on your, that'll help with your tension. Timothy asks, is the best cranking in the morning, midday, or afternoon? That actually depends on the fish. I mean, that's one of those things that can depend on a ton of things. So if they're feeding shallow in the mornings, then then obviously maybe midday, afternoon, because the fish, they're going to congregate out, move back to those deeper haunts. Your generation, when they're generating water, if it's a lake that generates current, that's going to be a big, factor too, because those fish don't leave out deep, when they are not generating, but they may, spread out. You may have to catch them another way, like dragging a football jig, big worm. But when they start generating and it starts pulling bait through, they're going to congregate a lot more. So it could be a morning, midday, afternoon. And something else we didn't talk about is in these situations, even if you're not on a lake that generates, when you're out deep, if you have a good wind also creates current. So wind is actually your friend when you're throwing a crankbait. Me, I like to position myself upwind and throw. That way you can make a long cast with the wind. And obviously now with the new Ultra trolling motors, having the spot lock, you can kind of get upwind, throw behind the boat, and make a long cast and cover stuff really well without having to worry about, positioning in the boat. Does anyone else have any questions? All right, guys. Well, hey, look, again, my name is Corey Stanley. You can look me up on Facebook, just Corey Stanley, Crey. My email at Navionics is cstanley@navionics.com. If you think of any other question that you may, that you might not have asked, feel free to shoot me an email, hit me up on Facebook. This webinar will be posted in about a week on the Navionics website under webinars. And, feel free to, there's going to be a ton more of these things. So they're all free. Be sure to tune in and take advantage of, learning all you can. I'm sorry, Ethan asked, do you catch more fish on more natural patterns or random colors? Like I said, I keep it simple with colors. So everything that I throw is going to have a shad pattern, just maybe a different color. So if it's a dingier water, I'm going to go something more chartreuse, or obviously you don't have a ton of light penetration in 20 foot of water, 25 foot of water on southern lakes where I fish. So, in my opinion, some of these colors catch fishermen, not fish. If that makes sense, which I have the same theory about frogs. You don't need, 30 different colors. They catch more fishermen than fish. I keep it simple. I go to baits I have confidence in, because if you have confidence in it, you'll keep it in your hand all day, and that's going to allow you to catch fish. So, again, guys, I appreciate everything. Check it out on Navionics.com. You'll be able to see the recording. Hit me up on Facebook or email me, cstanley@navionics.com if you have any questions. And I appreciate the attendance, guys.